4 months now, the world has watched the violence in Gaza with horror. Ceasefire talks have come and gone, but peace still feels far away. Every day, more civilians are caught in the crossfire, and leaders from around the world are calling for an end to the bloodshed. But one voice, Matt Duss, a former advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, is cutting through the noise. His message is simple but bold. Netanyahu is the problem, and he's not alone in thinking that. Duss isn't some outsider making noise for attention. He spent years working on foreign policy, human rights, and Middle East diplomacy. So when he speaks, people listen. In recent interviews, he's made it clear that Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is standing in the way of a real ceasefire, not just because of political games, but because of how he's chosen to use power, both at home and abroad. According to Duss, Netanyahu doesn't really want peace, at least not the kind of peace that gives Palestinians real freedom or dignity. Instead, he's focused on control, on holding his political base together, and on staying in office. And for that, war works better than peace. When bombs are falling and emotions are high, people rally behind their leaders. Duss argues that Netanyahu is using the chaos to keep himself in power, no matter how many lives are lost. This isn't just opinion, it's a pattern. Over the years, Netanyahu has repeatedly used military operations in Gaza during political crises. It's become a strategy, not a solution. And every time the world watches as Israel launches airstrikes, Hamas fires rockets, and civilians, especially in Gaza, pay the price. The cycle repeats and nothing really changes. That's the trap Duss wants people to see. And it's the trap he says we have to break if we ever want to see real peace in the region. When it comes to peace in Gaza, everyone seems to agree on one thing: it's complicated. But according to Matt Duss, former foreign policy advisor to Bernie Sanders, the reason for that complexity might not be as mysterious as it sounds. In his words, Netanyahu is the problem. It's a bold claim, but when you look at how things have played out over the years, it's not hard to see why he believes it. The longer the violence drags on, the clearer it becomes that politics, not peace, is the main game being played. Matt Duss isn't just another voice on the internet. He's someone who's worked inside the U.S. political machine, seen how foreign policy is shaped, and has advised one of the few mainstream politicians willing to challenge U.S. support for Israeli military actions. When Duss speaks, especially on Middle East affairs, people listen. And right now, he's sounding the alarm about why peace in Gaza remains so elusive, and why Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, might be a major reason why. At the heart of the issue is the ongoing Israeli military operation in Gaza, a campaign that has claimed thousands of lives and displaced even more. Calls for a ceasefire have echoed across the globe. Protests have filled the streets in cities around the world. But somehow the violence keeps going. Why? According to Duss, Netanyahu is intentionally keeping the situation unstable. Not necessarily because he has to, but because it benefits him politically. This isn't a new pattern. Netanyahu has a long history of using fear, conflict, and division to maintain power. Whether it's through harsh crackdowns, refusing negotiations, or pushing policies that escalate tension, it often feels like peace is never really the goal. For Netanyahu, staying in power may be the bigger priority, even if it comes at the cost of human lives and regional stability. And that's what makes this conflict feel so endless. For people like Duss, it's not just about stopping rockets or ending retaliation. It's about changing the deeper system that rewards leaders for choosing war over peace. And in Netanyahu's case, that system has worked in his favor for years. The real question is, how long will the world keep letting that slide? To understand why the violence in Gaza doesn't stop, you can't just look at Israel. You have to look at Washington. That's where the money comes from. That's where the weapons come from. And that's where the silence often comes from, too. Matt Duss has been outspoken about this for years. His message is simple. If the U.S. really wanted a ceasefire, it could make it happen. But so far it hasn't. And that's not an accident, it's a choice. Every year, the United States gives billions of dollars in military aid to Israel. That money supports jets, missiles, defense systems, and more. And while some of that is meant for defense, a lot of it ends up being used in Gaza, one of the most densely populated areas in the world. That means bombs hitting apartment buildings, schools, and hospitals. And when that happens, it's not just Israel doing it. It's also the US by extension. Matt Duss says this is one of the biggest roadblocks to peace. How can the US claim to support a ceasefire while sending weapons that fuel the war? It's a contradiction, and it's been going on for decades. Duss argues that until the US stops giving unconditional support, leaders like Netanyahu will never feel pressure to change. Why would they? The money keeps coming. The political cover is always there. And that means they can keep doing what they're doing, no consequences. And then there's the messaging. Every time things get bad, US officials say they support Israel's right to defend itself. But rarely do they talk about Palestinians' right to live free from occupation and violence. That one-sided support has shaped the whole conflict. It makes it seem like there's only one victim and only one villain. But the truth is much more complicated than that. And Duss believes the US has a responsibility to be honest about it. In his view, the US could force real change, not through war, not through threats, but by simply using its leverage, cutting or conditioning military aid, demanding accountability, supporting international law. These aren't radical ideas. They're common sense. But in Washington, even saying that out loud is treated like political suicide. That's why voices like Duss's are so rare, and why they matter more than ever right now. While the bombs are falling in Gaza, there's another story happening quietly inside Israel, and it's one that Matt Duss says we can't ignore. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu isn't just running a war. He's also fighting to save his political career. Over the past few years, he's faced protests, corruption charges, and massive public backlash. And instead of backing down, he's doubled down, forming one of the most extreme right-wing coalitions in Israel's history. Some of the people in Netanyahu's current government have openly racist views, call for more settlements in Palestinian land, and even reject the idea of a two-state solution entirely. These are not just political allies. They're part of the reason the situation in Gaza keeps spiraling. When leaders around Netanyahu push for more aggression, more occupation, and less compromise, it becomes almost impossible to talk about peace. And Netanyahu has chosen to stand with them, not against them. Matt Duss and other analysts see this as part of a dangerous strategy. Netanyahu knows he's in political trouble. He's been indicted on charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. And the longer he stays in office, the more control he has over his legal future. That gives him every reason to keep the country in crisis mode. A nation at war is less likely to remove its leader, especially one who claims to be defending the people. And that's exactly the image Netanyahu tries to maintain. But the cost of that image is enormous. Every time he tightens control over the West Bank or launches attacks on Gaza, the death toll rises. Families are destroyed, trust is shattered, and any chance at peace is pushed further away. Duss believes this isn't just a policy failure, it's a moral one. It's a case of a leader putting personal power ahead of human life. And it's something the global community should be calling out, not quietly accepting. Netanyahu's decisions don't happen in a vacuum. They are shaped by fear, ambition, and pressure from his right-wing partners. And until those political pressures change, Duss argues that real peace, a peace built on dignity and fairness for Palestinians and Israelis, will always be just out of reach. Every time the fighting in Gaza flares up, the headlines follow a familiar pattern: rockets, retaliation, casualties, and then silence. But behind those headlines is a humanitarian crisis that never really ends. Matt Duss has called this out over and over again. What's happening in Gaza isn't just war, it's a failure of leadership, a failure of policy, and in many ways, a failure of humanity. It's not a new disaster. It's the same disaster repeating itself because no one with power is willing to stop it. Gaza is often described as the world's largest open-air prison. Over 2 million people live there, packed into a strip of land with no real freedom of movement, little access to clean water and limited medical care. When bombs drop, there's nowhere safe to go. When electricity is cut, hospitals shut down. When borders close, food and medicine disappear. This is not just the result of war. It's the result of a blockade that has lasted for over 15 years. And Duss says it's time to admit what that really is: collective punishment. One of the hardest things to watch, according to Duss, is how normalized all of this has become. The world sees images of children pulled from rubble, of families mourning in the streets, and then moves on. But for the people in Gaza, there's no moving on. The trauma is constant, and the systems that keep it going are still in place. Netanyahu's government isn't just attacking Hamas. It's shutting down the entire territory over and over again and claiming it's for security. Duss argues that this logic, using security as a blanket excuse, has done enormous damage. Yes, Israel has a right to protect its citizens, but Palestinians have a right to live. They have a right to exist with dignity, with safety, and with freedom. And the longer leaders like Netanyahu act like those rights don't matter, the more the cycle of violence continues. Each round of fighting creates more anger, more grief, and more reasons for the next round to begin. What makes this worse, Duss says, is how preventable it is. There are solutions. There are paths to peace. But again and again, those paths are blocked by political fear, by bad faith actors, and by the refusal to treat Palestinians as equals. Until that changes, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza won't end. It will only get worse. And the people paying the price will be the ones who had no say in any of it. For a long time, speaking out about U.S. support for Israel was seen as political suicide in Washington. Anyone who criticized the Israeli government was quickly labeled anti-Israel or even anti-Semitic. That made it almost impossible to have honest conversations about what was really happening in Gaza or the West Bank. But now something's changing, slowly but clearly, and voices like Matt Duss have played a big role in that shift. More Americans, especially younger ones, are starting to question the traditional U.S. stance. They see the images from Gaza. They hear the stories of families losing their homes, children dying in airstrikes, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. And they're asking, why is our government still funding this? Why are we giving billions in weapons to a country that keeps using them like this? For many, the old excuses just don't hold up anymore. Duss has been saying this for years, that standing up for Palestinian rights is not about being against Israel, it's about being for justice. It's about applying the same values we claim to believe in: freedom, equality, human rights to everyone, not just the people we consider allies. And more politicians are finally starting to say the same thing. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, they're picking up where voices like Duss began, and they're refusing to stay silent. Social media has played a huge part in this shift, too. It's a lot harder to hide the truth when videos, photos, and first-hand accounts are spreading in real time. The stories coming out of Gaza are reaching people directly, no filters, no spin. And those stories are changing minds. Even many Jewish Americans are speaking out, saying that supporting human rights doesn't go against their identity. It's part of it. Duss believes that this shift in public opinion could eventually lead to a shift in policy. It won't be fast and it won't be easy, but pressure works. The more people speak up, protest, write, and vote with these issues in mind, the harder it becomes for politicians to ignore. And that's the hope, that one day real accountability will replace blank checks and real peace will replace endless war. At the center of all this, war, politics, aid, suffering, is a single uncomfortable truth: leadership matters. And according to Matt Duss, Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership is one of the biggest obstacles to peace in the region. Not because he's the only problem, but because he's the one with the most power and the least interest in changing the status quo. His decisions, his alliances, and his political survival tactics have helped shape a system that feeds on conflict instead of ending it. That's why Duss keeps saying it out loud. Netanyahu is the problem. It's not a personal attack. It's a political reality. As long as he stays in power and continues using war as a political tool, ceasefires will be temporary and peace will stay out of reach. The situation in Gaza isn't just a tragedy. It's the result of choices made by people who benefit from chaos, fear, and division. And the world is slowly waking up to that. But awareness isn't enough. Duss and others are calling for action. Real pressure, especially from the US. That means using American leverage to push for a ceasefire, demand human rights, and finally stop sending weapons without conditions. It also means rethinking how we define alliances. Being a friend to Israel shouldn't mean turning a blind eye to injustice. In fact, real friendship means holding each other accountable when it matters most. At the same time, this isn't just about Netanyahu. It's about what kind of world we want to live in. A world where leaders can bomb civilians and still get rewarded? Or a world where peace is more than just a press release? The longer we allow the same cycle to repeat, the more we become part of the problem. But if enough people demand change, if voters, activists, and policymakers refuse to stay silent, then something better is still possible. Matt Duss has taken a stand, and he's not alone anymore. More voices are joining him, louder and stronger every day. The question now is, will the world listen before more lives are lost? Or will we keep choosing politics over people, power over peace? The answer will define what happens next, not just in Gaza, but everywhere.